Coming up next on Meet the Farmer TV.
This program is a production of Meet the Farmer TV, LLC, in association with
Planet Earth Diversified, Nelly Productions, and Leslie P. Jenkins Photography and Graphic Design.
And that's what we were trying to prove to them today. Like, this is not your grandmother's kale. These are not your grandmother's turnip greens. These are something new and fresh. And on top of being flavorful and interesting, they maintain their nutritional qualities. So it's so much better for you. So you're supporting local agriculture, you're eating something that tastes better, and it's 10 times better for you than anything you buy in the freezer section.
One of the things I've learned from my work with farmers and communities is that farmers, as well as teachers, are one of the least appreciated and most underrated professions in this whole country.
As we look at tackling some of the biggest health problems that our nation faces, like obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and related issues like access to primary care and preventative health services, I've realized that little things like a garden can actually play a role in all of these larger discussions. They make us think about these issues in a way that maybe sometimes the policy conversations don't allow us to think. And it has truly inspired me and the White House staff to look for opportunities to put the topic of healthy eating right on the table and at the forefront of healthcare discussions. And sometimes it turns out that the food that is least healthy for us can sometimes be the cheapest. And even with the best intentions, as I know all of us are, we all care about our kids. Doesn't matter what our salaries are, what our positions are, we care about our kids, and we're doing the best that we can for them. And with the best of intentions in this society today, sometimes it's hard to make regular meals, healthy meals, a part of everyone's existence. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so supportive of farmers markets. For those of us who are battling the time crunch, and those for us whom access to fresh food is an issue in our neighborhoods, farmers markets are a really important, valuable resource that we have to support.
You know, farmers markets play a major initiative and key role in a program we initiated this week called Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food. We announced it this week at the USDA. It's a program which is chaired by Deputy Secretary Merrigan and is a department-wide effort to develop local and regional food systems and spur economic opportunity in rural America, and will be a major focus of our efforts in the months and years to come. The truth is that every single American family needs a farmer. I want you to think about that. Everyone needs a farmer. And we hope that Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food will initiate and begin a national conversation where we all learn more about where our food comes from, how it gets to our plate, and how hard our farmers work.
First of all, Jefferson believed in the importance of improving the soil. One year, Jefferson was living in Philadelphia, and he got a letter from his daughter Martha, and she complained about the insects ravaging the cabbage plants in the Monticello vegetable garden, and how they were destroying the plants almost as fast as she could set them out. And Jefferson wrote back and said, the problem with the plants is they're growing in lean soil. And he said that winter, the two of us, he said, would cover the entire garden with a heavy coating of manure. He said when plants are growing in rich soil, they will, in turn, in Jefferson's words, bid defiance to all sorts of pests, diseases, droughts, insects, and all the things that bedevil plants in gardens today. I think second of all, Jefferson didn't mind trying new things. The gardens were experimental at Monticello. Jefferson said that the greatest service which can be rendered any country is to add a useful plant to its culture, and he cultivated over 330 varieties of vegetables and 170 varieties of fruit in his fruit garden. And Jefferson tried everything that was new, and I think that's a great lesson for all gardeners. Don't be afraid to try something that's different. And for Jefferson, there were a lot of different things out there, from peanuts to crowder peas, from eggplants to tomatoes, from peppers that came from the Southwest to sweet potatoes. These were all really new crops at the time, and Jefferson wasn't afraid to try them out. I think another lesson we get from Thomas Jefferson is to share. Jefferson was sort of a seedy evangelist in the way he was a missionary of new and unusual vegetables and fruits. And he exchanged seeds and plants with some of the leading plantsmen in the world in the early 1800s. And he loved to share them with neighbors, friends, family, neighbors, and even fellow politicians. So what happened was that Jefferson would get a precious seed of a rare variety of bean, for example, and he'd pass them out to his neighbors. And then when Jefferson would kill them at Monticello, he could always go to his neighbors and get refreshing plants, new plants for his gardens. So there's a selfishness to sharing that comes through when one exchanges seeds and plants with friends and neighbors and all the people that you might know, because they can serve as a safety net for the problems you might inevitably have in a garden. I think Jefferson also believed in working with the land. He said that in gardening, the failure of one thing is repaired by the success of another. He had a holistic view of the relationship between nature and the garden. He believed that plants, when they're growing in healthy soil, could take care of themselves. And particularly if they're encouraged with good, rich soil. And so I think that the relationship between nature and the garden is a tough one, and I think Jefferson believed in this real holistic balance. When the Hessian fly was devouring his wheat crop at Monticello, Jefferson seemed much more interested in learning the life cycle of this destructive insect rather than the fact that his wheat crop was about to go down the drain. Weeds were a source of green manure, again, rather than a threat to his crops. So he believed with working with nature rather than with defying nature in the gardens here at Monticello. I think another important aspect of Jefferson was he kept records. He was kind of a scientist. He was a child of the Enlightenment. He believed in the scientific method. He believed in organizing the natural world around him. In fact, he organized all the vegetables into 3 categories: fruits, roots, and leaves, according to which part of the plant was being harvested. But his garden book, which was his diary of all the gardening activities that took place at Monticello, is a remarkable document. It's 66 pages long and bound in leather, and today it's at the Massachusetts Historical Society. And Jefferson used this as sort of a lab study. He'd write down when he planted his spinach in the fall, and whether that was too early or too late for the encroaching winter. Did the spinach produce or not? And he'd try all these different dates, and then he'd go back to his garden book and record them down, and then 3 or 4 or 5 years later he could look back and see what did well and what didn't well. So I think that's another important aspect of what Jefferson did that gardeners can learn today. I think Jefferson also believed in right plant, right place. He believed in organizing his garden so that each plant took the best advantage of the site it was in. For example, on top of a mountain, it's hard to grow a lot of plants that love really a lot of moisture, like vegetables like celery or Brussels sprouts or even cabbage in some ways. So Jefferson would often move those plants to lower, wetter places on the mountain where they would do better, these kind of choice microclimates. So he would choose and think a lot about where he was putting things and also when he planted them. Jefferson would often defy traditional frost dates in order to get his cool season vegetables in early in the springtime. And he'd commonly plant, for example, his peas in January or February. And that's good advice. It's a little risky sometimes, but it enables the peas to go through the spring season in cool temperatures before the hot weather came on. So I think Jefferson did a lot of wise things in the garden. He was really successful with a lot of crops, a lot of his favorites, from peas to artichokes to asparagus to figs to strawberries to peaches to apples. And I think he was a smart gardener in a lot of ways. But he was an experimenter. In some ways, a few gardeners failed as often as Thomas Jefferson. In his garden book, at least in some years, you see the repetition of the word failed time and time again. And one could say, perhaps, that a few gardeners failed as often as Thomas Jefferson. And he said himself, if I can succeed 1 out of 100 times, I feel like I've really accomplished something. So I think gardeners shouldn't be afraid of failing. They should take chances, they should experiment, they should try new things. And that's one of the, I think, great lessons of Thomas Jefferson in gardening.
Thomas Jefferson was famous for sharing seeds from Europe and from all over the world and from other parts of the United States with the local farmers. He thought it was that the vegetable cuisine was one of the most important things that you could offer to a country. And he was more proud of the varieties of vegetables that he introduced than of signing the Declaration of Independence. And, you know, we here at Southern Exposure feel like we're carrying on that legacy. We're trying to preserve heirloom varieties of vegetables, trying to help people know about seed saving, and trying to make sure that that goes on into the future. If we didn't do this, seeds are living things. They have to be grown out. And those varieties are lost. And we don't know what's important genetically. You know, there are varieties that carried a resistance to a kind of blight that took out more than half of the crop in the 80s here in the United States. And some little old corn that people used for feed that wasn't very valuable turned out to have resistance to that. And, you know, was really important to corn breeders. And, you know, you just don't know. You never know what you're going to need, what kind of change in climatic conditions. And for that matter, you don't really know about all the tastes that are out there. Some little tiny thing can be the best tasting thing ever.
I think Jefferson was all about making, you know, agriculture and gardening just a part of your daily life. And, you know, it just made sense. Of course you would know, like, where your food came from and how to grow it. It was just a part of your daily life.
We need a cook in every home, not someone who just warms food. We need cooks, people who know how to prepare food from scratch. Thomas Jefferson is known, of course, for his statesmanship, and for us who live here in Albemarle County for his beautiful home. But the thing that he is equally well known for is that he was one of the country's first horticulturists. He experimented with plants. He didn't just grow a garden and have people cook that food for him, but he labored with the idea of having the latest seeds and experimented in his garden. The garden here at Monticello is still a laboratory for local and heritage seeds. So his greatest legacy may have been, in addition to the University of Virginia and the Declaration of Independence, is his horticultural heritage.
I think it's really important to cook from scratch. Food tastes better. It's going to be better for you because you know what's in it. If you buy prepared food, you'd have no idea what someone's added in the back to make it taste good. So you know what, you have control over your ingredients. And if you don't know how to cook, then you might buy something like a delicata squash or a big bunch of kale and think, I don't know how to do this. And then you try it out and it doesn't taste good. And then your family says, uh-oh, there she's trying that stuff again, and I don't want to eat that because last time it didn't taste good. So it's important to have basic cooking skills so you know how to deal with fresh produce and make it really tasty. Not just healthy, but tasty.
Well, the problem is that we don't have the money part of it right, because there are all kinds of costs, even if it might be cheaper to bring it, maybe not by flight, but maybe by truck or maybe by train, freight train. There are all kinds of costs that this whole country is incurring that we're not talking about. We're not talking about that we're going to run out of oil, no question, that we are in many places already out of water, and that people are doing monoculture so that pretty soon there's not going to be any topsoil, any good soil. There's just going to be dust like there was for the Dust Bowl. And those are the costs that are not being factored in when people say it's cheaper to bring it from somewhere else. And if small agriculture costs more money, wouldn't it be wonderful if all the people who get all those subsidies for their corn and their soybeans, etc., had to give them up when they really weren't entitled to them because they're millionaires or zillionaires already and they don't need that money. And that money went somehow to help people who couldn't afford to buy the good food. Because the good food is more expensive than McDonald's. This is a bottom-up movement. This local sustainable movement is very definitely bottom-up. And who would have thought it had gotten this far as it's gotten? I don't know whether we went from 2,000 to 6,000 farmers markets in the last couple of years, but people are really, really determined. And while they're getting very little help from the government and they're getting a lot of flack from the industry, which is getting nervous, which means they must be doing something right. I don't know how quite it's all going to happen, except that if more and more people become involved and want this to happen, there will be more farmers markets, there will be more farmers. I mean, many, many young people are going into farming today. The small farms, there are more small farms than there were before. There are more very large farms than there were before. There are less of the middle farm, which is what the small farmer needs to be to be able to make money. Or part of what they have to learn is how to do value-added agriculture. So you not just raise the milk, you turn it into cheese. You don't just do the berries, you make berries into jam. That's the way farmers can survive better than having to take a job off the farm.
I'm kind of worried about greenwashing and local food being used as something to put on the menu, and then you still buy the same stuff you got before.
Yeah, I think it's a legitimate concern, and unfortunately it's in many ways an unavoidable problem. I mean, the same thing happened with organic food. I mean, organic sort of remained true to its organic ideals, and then it grew, and then it got popular, and the demand went up, and it grew some more. And then, the organic label started to mean a lot less than what it once meant. A lot of the problems of corporate farming that people who were buying organic wanted to avoid, they were not avoiding it anymore. And so I think a similar thing happens with, the Eat Local label, is it can get thrown around, and you can go to a restaurant and the menu will say locally sourced ingredients when maybe 1-2% of the ingredients are locally sourced and the rest are coming from inefficient, wasteful industrial systems. And I just think it's incumbent upon the consumer to I think that most people who even care about the issue of eating local, who find that the label has any meaning whatsoever, are also going to be the kind of people who are discerning about how it's thrown around.
A friend of mine who has a dairy cow, and he's a teacher, and he every year brings 5th graders to his farm to talk about milk from a cow and how to make cheese. And he took a group of 13 children to his farm one day and came back just shaking his head saying, 8 of those kids had no idea that milk came from a cow. And I just don't understand how that happens. And it's very unfortunate. And we want to see it end. We want to see kids grow up with an understanding of where their food comes from and why their choices of what they choose to eat make such a difference.
As more people say we want local food, farmers are able to grow more local food. They can respond, they can offer jobs in the community, they can support the community by making a living, and they're providing a really good diet for all of us. JABA started getting involved in the local food scene about 4 years ago. And since then, we've not only seen people buying more local food, but we've seen people taking more opportunity to build economic development using local food. You've got folks here using the EBT machine and spending money out of their pockets. You have folks going to grocery stores asking for local food. You have people going to other markets. Markets are cropping up everywhere because there's demand for local food. You have business entrepreneurs who are coming in to say, look, we send out 50,000 meals, like JABA, for example, and we buy those meals from somewhere else. Why don't we produce those meals using local food? So the economic development just keeps growing and growing. You have more people not only making food, but you have more people buying food and making added value for their food. And so you've got jobs in the community that are coming as a result of it. You've got better nutrition. You have economic development, and the money is staying right here in this community. So I go to the farmer's market one Saturday and I spend $20 on local produce. That goes into our farmer's pocket. They employ people to help run their farm. And they also spend money here in the local neighborhood. So that $20 compounds over and over and over in the community. Whereas when you go to a supermarket, you're supporting farmers in California. They don't spend their money here. So the logic isn't quite as good to buy non-local food as it is to buy local food. Not only that, local food is picked in its ripest part. It is healthy, it is delicious, it's got a higher nutrition content in it, and helps the local economy as well.
Food freedom is critical, and people need to be aware of that beyond the people that are producing. I kind of look at the situation as when you put a frog into a cold or cool pot of water and then slowly turn up the heat. Most people are not aware of the assault, and then all of a sudden somebody's going to wake up and they're going to be telling you what you can grow in your own garden, or they're going to be putting a tag on your goat or something to track it through a national ID system, and they're going to say, how did this happen? Well, it happened because there weren't enough people paying attention. I'm glad that you're here and that you're paying attention today.
And I think when we're looking at the green energy economy and moving away from these corporate bailouts that I've opposed, we're getting away from the bigger is better mentality really across our economy. and starting to think again about community-based models. You know, what's so exciting to me about the green energy opportunities in Southern and Central Virginia is not just moving from, you know, oil to, say, canola oil. It's about keeping the value and money in the community. These ones that are working, these biorefineries, you go to the pump, 93 cents of every dollar you spend there stays in the community. So we're looking specifically for things that are not only new fuel sources, don't compete with food, locally owned and grown, with that going back, with the farmers having a stake in it. You know, there's a poultry digester we're looking at out in one of our counties, and what's really important, they could probably get some venture capital to come in and fund it, but then all that profit's going to go out. So we're seeing this not just as a chance to kind of throw a few more table scraps at our farmers. We want to get back to farming being something that actually benefits farmers. We're looking at a repopulation of our rural communities. Now, that may seem wide-eyed right now, but I think there are visionaries right now that are fighting for that vision, and you got this weird alliance of some pretty left and pretty right folks who really get it, and I think that can be a powerful message. Well, I think there are two different problems that require two different solutions. The first problem is that the public, understandably, will overreact when they hear something scary. Well, what if my peanut butter is contaminated? Well, that's pretty scary. My kid might get sick and die. Now we have a news coverage and a corporate media that tends to thrive on fear and all that. The solution there, I think we need to do public education. We need to do our job of letting people know what is a rational risk, what's an irrational risk. The second problem is that I think sometimes Big Ag sees an opportunity in that to use this sort of fear to put in regulations that will crush the smaller farmers and really protect the bigger farmers. You know, we have a real crisis right now with our dairy farmers, with where the price of milk is, a lot of things that were totally beyond the control of our farmers. We also have had price reimbursement rates that haven't changed since 1978 for our dairy farmers. So obviously we want to get more support there to get through the tough times. On the other hand, some of the big dairy farmers are seeing who's shutting down. It's the small dairy operations that are shutting down. They can't afford to go 2-3 years of losses. They can't go another quarter. So oddly enough, we reconstituted the Dairy Caucus, bipartisan, up in Congress to try to deal with this crisis and look down the road. Suddenly you saw some of the bigger dairy elements kind of pulling back because maybe you see an opportunity to do that. So right now in our politics, when we have a debate like food safety, the only two voices are these consumer groups, which I think thrive on that overreaction to headlines. And then you have Big Ag, which sometimes has a very different set of priorities than the small farmer does. What's great about VICFA and other groups like it, and there aren't a lot of groups like it, is presenting that third option, which is consumers who really get it and like locally grown high-quality food, and farmers who get it because they're talking about that quality product and safety. You know, VICFA was one of the first, I think it was Catherine, to say, look, you know, if you buy bad sausage from a local farmer, you know where to go. You get your accountability right up front. You don't need the FDA or USDA to be part of it. If you go to a nameless grocery store to buy sausage, you want to know someone looked at it. So this idea of having the same set of regulations for locally grown food and corporate food doesn't make sense. So I think if we fight on those levels, we really do go out and engage with the public, have conversations about what is and isn't, you know, a rational risk, and then we kind of create a political counterbalance to the voices that tend to define agriculture. You will see things change over time. But the other, I think, element that's out there right now is a real kind of, I think, legitimate populist pushback on the bigger is better corporate mentality. You know, in our banking sector, it was the big banks that failed. Our local banks, most of them held strong. Most of them hadn't made the bad loans. They hadn't gone for the greedy overreaching. So when we go into Cure Banking, we don't want to punish our good local banks for what these big mega banks did and sort of betting on people failing, essentially. So I think there's a space right now in America that neither party has quite tapped into, of folks who really want to get back to that decency and basic accountability that you get in something like the locally grown food movement. Well, I don't take money from lobbyists, which sets me apart right up front from a whole lot of folks, or corporate PACs. And so, you know, there is that world. I also come out of grassroots organizing in the nonprofit sector, so I actually believe in the decency and integrity of people. I think the media and both political parties tend to bank on people being dumb and reactionary. And if you treat them with that kind of politics, the debate will be lowered to that level. but if you raise it up. I'll give you an example. I actually really want to support healthcare reform, but I also supported the idea of taking the month of August to go out and road test this with the American people. Let's get their input. Now, I've been doing that all year, but every time I meet with people, I get even better ideas about how to do it. So yes, this is a serious problem that's really crushing a lot of our middle-class families, small business owners. A lot of farmers have a family member who does a second job just to get their health care coverage. I hear that all the time. So we have some real flaws in the system. But let's actually trust that people are intelligent enough to look beyond these 30-second scare tactics from the insurance companies or the oil companies and have the debate. And what you see, I think, happening, for example, with the energy debate was, the scary big money politics will always win the first news cycle and the second news cycle. But if you get out there and you make your case, as I've tried to do to farmers on this, I understand why farmers are skeptical of this. And frankly, the first draft of the energy bill wasn't any good for farmers. But the last draft is one of the most exciting opportunities we've had for real value creation on our farms in generations, not the table scraps, the real entree stuff we're offering back to our farmers. But that's going to happen from going out and actually meeting with people. And farmers are a group that know to be skeptical of what they're getting from a 30-second spot. So I think there are no shortcuts. We just got to go out and have the conversation. And you know what? Sometimes I'll be wrong, and I'll figure that out from the conversations too. And sometimes we can so put the founding fathers on a pedestal. It was a pretty elite-driven politics back in the day, and I think we've actually developed the technology in some ways to make it easier now. 2-year election cycles, the money, all those are broken. I think we need fundamental overhaul. But what I find is a lot of politicians on both sides want to be in that echo chamber of DC, and they assume that if they talk to a trade association of farmers, they've talked to farmers. Well, sometimes those farm groups do a pretty good job, and other times I come home and I hear something very different than what the trade associations are saying up in Washington. So really there's no shortcut to going out and talking to people and listening.
In 1999, I introduced legislation that became the most progressive incentive-based land conservation program in the country, because riding up and down the valley, I was just tired of seeing that last 40-acre field yield up that last crop of asphalt. It's about preserving some semblance of the family farm. Now, I understand bigger is better for some people, but it's about preserving the small family farm that actually produces food that can be consumed locally. That's really what agriculture is all about. That's what rural heritage is about to me. Here's the thing, we're not going to move back. I mean, I think we just have to be better. I think that we are going to move to a model of agriculture where the small farm, the independent producer who can produce and sell food locally is going to be a model for local food production. I think in part popularized by books like The Omnivore's Dilemma. I think that the stars are just lining up right for an agricultural renaissance in Virginia. That there are also models of agriculture up in Fauquier and Loudon and down in Augusta and Nelson and Albemarle that can be models for and Southwest Virginia, frankly, they can be models for the rest of the country. We're going to revive agriculture right here in Virginia.
This program is a production of Meet the Farmer TV, LLC, in association with
Planet Earth Diversified, Nelly Productions, and Leslie P. Jenkins Photography and Graphic Design.
For additional information and extended versions of this program, visit our website, www.meetthefarmer.com.